Your Excellency, Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, Your Excellency Dennis Francis, President of the General Assembly, distinguished ministers and finance ministers who are with us today, Your Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. It is my honor to welcome you to the Forum of the Economic and Social Council on Financing for Development, under the theme Embarking on the Path Towards the Fourth International Conference on Financing for Development. We are meeting at a critical juncture at which urgent measures are required to accelerate our ability to achieve the SDGs. The current reality is complex. As we know, only 15% of the SDG goals are on the right track. The financing deficit for the SDGs is increasing as a result of the accumulated effects of climate change and natural disasters, the consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic, geopolitical conflicts, and the difficult financial conditions that we've experienced. Currently, many countries are facing major fiscal restrictions and high risks of indebtedness, with an average debt burden for LDCs that has increased from 3.1% of their income in 2010 to 12% in 2023, which is the highest level since the year 2000. The overwhelming burden of debt and the vulnerability to unpredictable shocks has significantly undermined developing countries' ability to invest in sustainable development. International cooperation for development is subjected to the pressure to respond to the crisis and at the same time to address climate challenges and long-term development. Increase in trade and investment has not followed the pace of the growth of the GDP as a result of the resurgence of protectionism and disruptions to international trade. And as if that were not enough, these challenges are also exacerbated by the fact that the current international financial architecture is currently insufficient when it comes to coming up with responses to these problems. However, we have heard appeals to find creative solutions and the availability of many leaders to address this situation. In this regard, I would like particularly to pay tribute to the Secretary General for his efforts to make headway in reforming the international financial architecture. The Summit and Pact of the Future are an opportunity for us to question these old paradigms and to improve cooperation in addressing critical challenges, dealing with gaps in global governance, and undertaking the necessary transformations to reaffirm our existing commitments, and this includes the Sustainable Development Goals. I would also like to underscore the consultations undertaken by the ECOSOC Bureau with the boards of the World Bank and the IMF in Washington, D.C. last February, where we saw collaborative spirit and the availability and willingness to work together on the reforms that are necessary to fully implement the 2030 Agenda. Your Excellencies, our task is not an easy one, but we must work together and we must unite all of our political capital and determination to address these challenges. First of all, we need to have more effective mechanisms for debt relief and to resolve debt crises. More than half of the LDCs and other low-income countries are facing unsustainable levels of debt or are at severe risk of being in that situation. Debt restructuring remains too slow and superficial, and this leads to a significant reduction in social expenditure today and thus to lower growth and development tomorrow. Treating debt within the common framework must be done more quickly and with predictable timeframes. We must find ways to effectively coordinate public and private creditors, as well as ensuring that commercial creditors fulfill their task in a more effective way. Secondly, we must significantly increase the volume of concessional financing. Broadening resources for multilateral development banks is critical. This can be achieved through greater provision of capital and making better use of the existing capital. In addition to this, redirecting special drawing rights through the multilateral development banks can also help to contribute to increasing loans from this source. Thirdly, we must continue to strengthen the international financial security network and provide countries that are in a crisis with sufficient contingency funding. Fourthly, we must also continue to make headway to address the systemic problems that we have seen. The existing financial architecture has been insufficient in providing support to the mobilization of stable resources and long-term resources for the necessary investments to achieve the SDGs and to deal with the climate crisis. We need urgently to make headway in reforming the governance structures of the international financial institutions, making them more inclusive and representative. Your Excellencies, we must also not forget that at the end of the day, it is people who suffer the most direct consequences of the limitations of the financial system. This has an impact on their well-being, their access to social protection systems, and their ability to build a prosperous and sustainable future. Women, particularly in developing countries, often face additional barriers in accessing financial services. This limits their ability to undertake entrepreneurial projects, to access credit, or to fully participate in the formal economy. In addition to this, marginalized communities and vulnerable groups, such as persons with disabilities, indigenous peoples, and refugees, tend to be most affected by the lack of financial resources and accessing basic services. This further exacerbates their position of vulnerability and marginalization. Your Excellencies, friends, the discussions over the next few days are critical. We have a unique opportunity to make our voices heard and to pave the way for the changes that the international financial architecture requires. Your contributions will feed into the intergovernmental processes that are to come, including the high-level political forum on sustainable development in July and the Summit of the Future in September, in addition to the forthcoming conferences on the SIDS and LLDCs, so that financing for development plays a critical role. The 4th International Conference on Financing for Development, which will be held next year in Spain, also offers a unique opportunity for us to mobilize the necessary political momentum to undertake the aforementioned ambitious reforms. Clearly, the SDGs and the commitments under the Paris Agreement will not be achieved if the international financial architecture does not channel sufficient resources and with sufficient speed towards the most vulnerable economies in the world. In this regard, the challenges that we are facing can only be addressed through greater international cooperation. It is time that we commit to global solidarity and that we find new ways of working together for the common good. I invite you to participate actively in the forthcoming discussions and to come out of them with strong commitments, innovative solutions, and new alliances. That is what this moment requires, and that is also what is required to maintain our promise for sustainable development that leaves no one behind. Thank you very much.